Welcome to It's Not Your Fault. I'm your host, Kim Powers-Stilson, here with author, philanthropist, food expert Steve Shenk, and he is the author of It's Not Your Fault. You've heard about it all over Facebook and the internet, and I'm glad you've joined us here. Of course, we forgot to mention we've got Lexi, the producer of the show.
Yeah.
So, Steve, in the past shows, we've talked a bit about you and a bit about your solution for food. Today, in this show, let's get into the book, It's Not Your Fault. Now, people come to your conferences, they get online, they watch your webisodes, listen to your radio interviews. We've heard you on national radio. For those of you, pretend like people haven't heard about you. And for those who know nothing about the book, It's Not Your Fault, could you set up the scenario of the characters involved and how the book works?
Well, one of the things, you know, an awful lot about what any of us do is we project out onto the screen of life who we are from the inside. And all of the troubles and the questions and things, when I was out in the field, Kim, I'd buy every kind of a self-help and motivational tape I could get. And I bought, you know, Think and Grow Rich, The Magic of Believing, all of the old ones. And at one point in time when Sherry and I were struggling with trying to get me decent at the job of bringing in an income, when we were in the cemetery business, we ran across a book that was by a guy by the name of Joe Carbo. And it was The Lazy Man's Way to Riches. And what it was is it essentially told you part of what I tell folks in the application portion of It's Not Your Fault. It was a start, but we decided we had to do something. And one of the principles was you write down everything that you want to achieve, all your goals, and you read them twice a day. And that was kind of about all it was, and it had all these glorious promises and things like that. But we were so broke, and I had all these books, and I picked up a lot of principles along the way, and then I try and apply them, and it took, well, actually it took 20 years in sales before I started writing down some of these things, but they became axioms. But what we did was we wrote, I think it was, I can't remember, I think I told you before when we were discussing, I think about 57 goals. And we started doing that, and I'd come home after appointments at night, and I'd be just dead tired, and I'd sit on the bed, and I'd say, honey, I'll just read them twice in the morning. She said, read them now. And sometimes I'd go in and I'd try and sneak into bed. Now, you got to understand, I'm not a very disciplined person. I don't probably deserve to be successful, but this sweetheart of mine was just absolutely, she was, I said before, on the subject of decisions, if you made a decision, she'd say, okay, decide. And then once you decide, you didn't dare say, well, now I wonder if, oh my gosh, you know, the world would come to an end. So anyway, so I read those, and in a very short period, in 6 months' time, I outsold a one-man shop, outsold a 17-man home office operation. We did it in 6 months, and we beat the volume of 17 salespeople that have been selling for a whole year.
And the difference was?
Deciding and never undeciding, and then applying some other things that we'll be talking about in the book that I've learned later that eliminates, you see, you can decide on a goal, but the first thing that most people do is they'll say, but then again, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I should, and I don't know if they'll let me, and they get into all the victimizations, and victims have big butts, as you know, I could have, but, you know, that type of thing. But the thing that I learned from that is that the deciding and the doing, and we had accomplished every one of those goals within 6 months' time. It's fast. It's really fast. If we as human beings, as magnificent creators, would realize that we have power over our destiny, power over our circumstances. If we don't like the life we've got, we have the power to change it. But nobody believes that because they think that everything comes from the outside. Even people who are practicing religion don't understand how faith works. They think that God just gives it to them. No! Faith is an action word. And so the one goal that we didn't get was a Yamaha motorcycle, an 1100 Midnight Special, 1980. And when we went to the awards banquet for that year, I got a bonus big enough so that Sherry took the money and bought the bike for me. So
I mean, so your first goals were these paying for this, paying for that, and the
fun one. Yeah, get my butt out of trouble.
Yeah, and the fun one is the motorcycle, and you got that too.
Yeah, got that too.
So for those listening who are saying, okay, I've read all those books too, like you, Napoleon Hill, etc., Norman Vincent Peale, what's different about what Steve Shenk has written? How is it delivered that feels different and resonates? Now, I read the book, so I know. I don't want to be a spoiler, but I do know. And it's different than any other book out there. And it's something that you just incorporate into your life. It's so easy. You don't have to decide it. You just become. It's one of those books where you just change because you see. It makes sense, and you just do.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. The only thing that works for people, if they're in sales, if they're in relationships, if they're in a job, if anything that they want to accomplish, is they have to believe that they can accomplish it. They have to believe it. And so these principles are so simple and useful that people can actually believe it. And the reason it's so believable is because I had to do it. I'm not an overnight success. See this gray? It didn't used to be that color. I've been involved with the food industry, the preparedness industry for 30 years, and it took 20 to 25 of those years just accumulating little bits and pieces, and a lot of starvation, a lot of depression, a lot of discouragement, a lot of failure. In fact, one of the chapters in the book is Failure, the Road to Success. And you see, there's a lot to that, because very simply, we don't do anything, at least very much of anything, if we're successful and everything's going well for us. The only time that people really change anything is when they get hit right across the forehead with a 2x4 and they realize that what they're doing isn't working and they hate the situation they're in. Then they choose to do the two things that people hate more than anything else, and that's to think and decide. Okay? And remember the value of deciding. When we decide, we have initiated the spiritual creation of whatever we've decided. And then if we can believe it, if we don't undecide it by saying, well, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can afford it, I don't know if my wife will let me do it, I don't know this, I don't know that, and I'm not sure of this, and if we uncreate it, then it builds it right down. So we decide, and then we go, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of people
then
do
we
that.
decide, and we, so, but the way this works, and the way it's so usable, and I know you've got another question for him, but I'll hurry on this, is what we did is we took Michael, the average man, that's sitting there in his, 4 on the floor, 0 to 60, miles an hour in 10 seconds, lazy boy chair, watching TV, and then
he represents every man.
He represents every man, and he has a visitor come.
Okay, and we're going to take a break. We're going to tell you all about Michael and who his visitor is. Steve Shenk, again, Kim Power-Stilson. It's Not Your Fault TV show. We'll be right back with more.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
And welcome back to It's Not Your Fault. Kim Power-Stilson here with Steve Shenk, the author of It's Not Your Fault. You've heard about the conferences, you've watched him on TV and heard him on national radio. This is the author right here. And Steve has been telling us a story about how the book came about and how you learned some of the principles that you're sharing. And during the break, you were talking a little bit about... Before the break, we were talking about Michael, and then we were talking about the semblance of Michael to your life and your life journey, and then we're going to mention the Guardian. So,
well, Michael is sitting in his living room contemplating the fact that he has a bunch of honeydew jobs on a Saturday and watching. He's paged back to the old. Remember the old Roadrunner cartoons, you know, where the Wile E. Coyote is always trying to get the Roadrunner, and he always gets mashed in the process. But anyway, in the process of this, all of a sudden, there's a flash of light that comes out of the TV, and instantaneously Michael, who is representing Everyman, basically he has the history of all of my stupidity throughout the period of my life.
So
and all the
he's
questions.
you. He's the combination of all of your experiences.
That's how I know all this goofy stuff that people worry about and they're scared of, because I was worried about and scared about it, and I failed as much as anybody. And so he's automatically catapulted to a situation where he's beside a waterfall on a grassy knoll with a, not that grassy knoll, by the way, but anyway, the grassy spot where they've got two chairs that are set in an S conversation thing. In other words, his chair would have been here, and then there's this Guardian. The guy's dressed in white. And
this is the setting in the book, so you know.
He has this voice that comes, this voice out of the clouds that comes and said, "This is the Guardian. He is the guru. He is," and it goes on.
So he's going to listen to him.
And talks about, the fact that he is basically the teacher. He is the sound of one hand clapping, And so, anyway, the Guardian, which has kind of a goofy sense of humor, and I don't know where that had come from, but the fact is that he has a goofy sense of humor, and he says, I've been trying to figure out where that announcement voice comes from, but it's kind of cool, isn't it? And
that's funny.
And then later on, he and of course Michael is, shook up by it.
So.
Yeah.
So the idea, and I love in the book, it's so dramatic, right? It just pulls you in because you can see actually this happening. The book doesn't leave much, it lets you imagine in your own mind the scenario. So now tell us how this process will help us. For those listening saying, okay, I'm interested, this book sounds good, they're on the grassy knoll, but why is this following Michael's relationship and interaction with the Guardian important, and how does it help us?
Well, what happens is that the Guardian ultimately asks, what do you want? Hey, it's your dime. Back when phone booths were a dime, we used to say drop a dime on somebody.
$1, right?
But anyway, so what do you want? And Michael says, well, how do things work? And because basically, isn't that what everybody wants to know? How do things work?
And how do they work for me? That's what I want to know.
And you see, that's what Michael was saying, and the guardian said, well, okay, so you're the student. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Everybody's heard that one. But you see, the interesting thing is until the student is ready, the teacher not only can't appear, no one can be a teacher. Because there's no such thing as a teacher, there is only a student. It's just like light. There is no such thing as darkness, there's only lack of light. There's no such thing as cold, there's only lack of heat. There's no such thing as a teacher, there's only a student. And so so Michael says, well, gee whiz, am I the chosen one? And the guardian says, okay, you've got this 5.5 foot high, dog-eared, stack of self-help books. You've listened to motivational tapes for hours and hours and hours. And if you were charged in a court of law with being a student, I'm afraid that you will be convicted. So what do you want? And so then it goes on from there. And so what the guardian is doing is putting Michael in a whole bunch of different scenarios. One of them is
throughout the book, right?
In the book, and it's, for example, it's the perfect building. When a building is created, it's brand new. It's perfect as a building. It's just like people later on in that same section, it uses the example of this muscle right here. Is that a perfect muscle? Well, the guardian asked Michael, is that a perfect muscle? And Michael doesn't quite know what to ask. And the guardian says, okay, as a muscle goes, is that a perfect muscle? Yeah, it does what a muscle does. Now, can the muscle be developed? Yes, it can. So this perfect building, the guardian likens to Michael the perfect building to a person when they're born. They're perfect. They're innocent. They have no trash in them. And when the building is used for the first time, it gets trash in it. And then if the builders, the owners, or the management team go in and say, oh my gosh, it's ruined forever, that's kind of like when a person does something stupid and they say, oh man, I really screwed up. Well, you're messed up forever. You've sinned and now you'll never make it back to God or heaven or whatever. It's the same way. What the building management does, they clean it out, they clean it up, and it becomes perfect again as a building to function as a perfect building. And we take guilt and the stupid things that we do in our lives that don't fit what our self-image of what we want to be match up to, and so we clean out the trash. You do something stupid, you take care of it, you go through what it takes to fix it, and then you realize another principle that says, okay, now that you've fixed everything, you've apologized, you've given it back, you've done whatever, and you decide you're never going to do it again, decide you're never going to do it again, okay, does the past exist? No, it doesn't. So one of the principles in there is you are like a perfect building. You're perfect for whoever you are. Now find out who you are and be that perfect person. And it doesn't have to match up with everyone else's approval of who in the heck you are.
Fabulous. That would give a lot of people a lot of relief.
Oh, yeah. And you see, when you take the fact that you are already perfect, you don't need anyone else's approval. My mom used to have a very interesting saying. And at one point in time, in the book we talk about how the most important thing that you can develop is approval of yourself. And there's a real issue with approval. You see, approval and everybody being required to seek their parents' approval, the church's approval, God's approval,
community,
everybody else's approval, the government's approval, and their kids' approval, and all this kind of approval crap. What happens is it's the exact opposite of a principle that will take over the universe called unconditional love. Okay? Approval says, I will love you if I approve of everything that you do and you do exactly what I tell you to do.
Ouch.
Yeah, okay. So getting back to this, what people are dealing with is guilt coming from every direction because they're not approved of it. But the most important thing, the most important approval that you can get, and it's okay, is approval of yourself. And my mom used to have she was a very quiet little gal. She was a bit heavy set. She was a farm wife. She was a hard-working gal, and she was very quiet. And she'd go down, we belonged to the Methodist Church in Anoka. And well, everybody's dead and gone back then, so I can't offend anybody. But, you know, this is the church that a lot of the significant women in the community belonged to. And she'd sit there, and she was tremendous at crocheting. She could crochet these doilies that she'd put on her arms. Yeah, and they're just gorgeous. And she'd just sit there, and she had little spectacles, you know, that she'd sit there and she'd watch, and she'd listen to all the conversation back and forth. And at a certain point, she couldn't stand it anymore because she's so practical and so commonsensical, if that's a word. And she'd just say, you know, and then she'd make a comment, and it just kind of cut everybody off at the knees. And then she'd go back to her crocheting. And it was the same way. We were living in a German family, and we'd have discussions which were at the top of our lungs using the King's English, which is not German, but it's not French. But anyway, and all of a sudden, all she'd have to do is lift up those little spectacles and, you know, wipe a tear, and everybody goes into freeze frame. My dad would say, "Gladdy, what's the matter?" And she'd say, "That's enough."
Oh.
You shouldn't have done that. But anyway, she was a lot like Sherry in that respect. But anyway, so what would happen is people, if they could talk with her and they would criticize anything she'd say or any of her common sense, she had this little saying that she'd say. She'd just adjust her little spectacles and say, "Me am who me am. I am who I am." Now, if any of you are familiar with scriptures, you will understand that this is a significant statement by God. I am who I am. And is this not the archetype of what we should be able to be and how we should feel about ourselves and how we, when we have relationships with other people, should make them feel about themselves so that they can say about themselves when they're with you, "I like me best when I'm with you. Me am who me am."
Steve, of course, you talking about your mom and what she says. Is this this is peace? Your mom sounds like she was at peace, right? And is this something that Michael, the guardian, helps Michael identify and change or adjust or become in his life?
People are afraid. People are stressed. But if you knew that all you had to do was sit down and decide what you want to change in your life, write it down in a little journal called My Book of Life.
And we'll find out more about that in the next shows.
And if you would follow the principles that we'll be talking about, you will not just be following blindly these principles. You'll be following principles that you understand and know why they work. You see, faith is a great thing if it's based on the concept of belief in something that you don't understand, but it's even a greater thing if you understand why these principles that you're applying work, and if you knew that you could write down in your journal the objective that you have, how you want to change your life, what you want to be, what you want to become, what you want to have, how you want to relate. And if you would follow these principles, understanding why they work, that you have total control over your life, and you don't have to be dependent on whether the boss gives you a raise or whether someone likes you on their own. You can literally reach the dream and the magnificent promise that was made by Plato and was made by Emerson. Okay? That for which you are grateful cannot be denied. So we're going to talk about how everyone can take control of their destiny. It will eliminate addiction.
Steve, I can't wait to watch the rest of these shows and learn more about this. So listen, if you love what Steve's saying and you could resonate with that, especially when he said addictions, a lot of people probably thought, I need some help with that with family members. Please look for Steve Shenk on Facebook. Go to steveshenk.me. Get a copy of your book if you like. Join us here every week and find out more about these principles, and watch us as a journey of Michael, aka Steve Shenk, growing up, and the Guardian, and find out as they learn these principles and enjoy this with us. And you'll get Steve Shenk here live every week. So thank you so much for joining us on It's Not Your Fault.
It's fun. Thank you.